together. The fact is, we live in a world where dark forces are attacking our faith, our families, and the core of what it means to live in a just, free, and prosperous society. If we don't work together as children of God, if we don't heal the divide between us, then we will be conquered by the wicked ones in this world. Now, I discovered something that I wasn't expecting to find when I started my research into this topic. What I was trying to figure out is if Trump could actually be impeached, even though he's not the president. If what I'm about to present to you is right, then Trump and the Patriots might be about to pull off the biggest and most brilliant sting operation in history. Again, this isn't meant to be a prediction, but what I discovered needs to be shared, and I encourage your skepticism and honest feedback. I'm just a guy trying to figure out just like you are. As an infamous military insider once said, quote, "When do you play the trump card?" Well, if this is the trump card, then truly nothing can stop what's coming, and you'll see why as we continue. It's because there's no way for the bad guys to pull out of the game at this point. They've backed themselves into a corner. Doubling down comes at a terrible price. The loss of a way out of the web of lies, breach of oaths, and cover-ups that you create for yourself. In this case, the deep state. Now, before we get started, please head on over to stillnessinthestorm.com/donate and support this channel and our work. Big tech and the deep state government are trying to shut down patriotic channels and Christian businesses like mine. Well, last year we had our accounts pulled. There was no way for us to fund ourselves outside of donations. We had to go to donation base. So literally, if it wasn't for the support from viewers and readers, we couldn't continue on to produce this information. Now, there's other ways to support Stillness in the Storm, which is supporting our partner businesses that we work with. If you go to stillnessinthestorm.com/EMF Harmonized and stillnessinthestorm.com/Ascent Nutrition, you'll find two other really awesome businesses that you can support us there. You can get awesome health products, stuff that I actually use, supplements. Nootropic Focus is something I use and it works really well. And EMF Harmonized, which are the stickers that basically mitigate electromagnetic radiation. Really awesome products. Check them out. So let's get into this here. And before we can get to the big reveal, what might be the boom of all booms, we need to put some pieces of the puzzle on the table. Because this information is something that is hidden, but is well within our society, it's going to take some time to really unpack and for you to understand. But these things that I'm talking about, these are not like conspiracy theories. These are valid principles of the way governments and law work. These are things that the cabal has to contend with. And when you understand the full nature of what they've done, I think you'll agree that there's a lot to consider, that this itself might be the key thing that allows the Patriots to finally and completely remove the cabal. So in my analysis, I've concluded that Biden didn't win against Trump fair and square. Biden, with the help of big tech, big business, and the mainstream media, stole the election. As the recent Time article entitled "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election" put it, quote, "A well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies, working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information." If you haven't seen this, guys, you really need to check it out. They're trying to sell us in the idea that they needed to take out the boogeyman Trump. And that is for a good reason. It's not that they're just trying to shove our faces in it. They need to sell us so that we can acquiesce, so we can consent to their false and tyrannical government. And I'll explain why as we go on. So let's get some historical pieces on the table here. As far back as 2016, Trump was outspoken about the fact the system was rigged. Flashing forward 4 years, for his entire 2020 campaign, Trump was vehement that the election was going to be rigged, citing mass mail-in voter fraud as one of the primary weapons. Days after the November 3rd election, the Associated Press declared Biden president-elect, despite the fact Trump had not conceded, and the constitutional process was still unfolding. Biden immediately ran with the declaration from the Associated Press and formed the fictitious office of the president-elect, willfully violating the constitutional process and asserting himself the winner in a Mussolini-like hat tip to tyrannical dictators. This in and of itself was a serious violation against the truth, justice, and the laws of our nation. That itself is like a huge point that can't be understated. I'll just take a pause for a moment and explain to you what we're going to review in this video is the substance of law, the stuff about what makes a country truly just, fair, and gives the elected officials in it the right to rule, so to speak. It's because we consent. And if they fail to honor their office, if they willfully violate the law, then we don't have a true valid government anymore. Then it's something critical to understand with respect to what I'm going to unfold here. The key takeaway here is that election irregularities were present. Thousands of affidavits were filed wherein affiants testified to the fact election rules were broken and fraud took place. For the record, sworn testimony in the form of an affidavit is evidence by any other standard of law, but the courts and the media turned a blind eye. The media likes to say there is no evidence of election fraud. That is totally and completely a lie. There is definitely evidence of election fraud. An affidavit is evidence. Now, whether or not what's claimed in the affidavit is true or not is unclear. So what often happens in law is that testimony is given, and then that testimony goes on the record, and then that opens up a venue of law to actually figure out what happened. But because the justice system didn't actually create that venue of true law for us to decide what happened, they violated their oath. So with the exception of a few honest venues of law, courts across the nation dismiss cases of election fraud without looking at a single shred of evidence. While these hearings were taking place, these governors certified the election results in their states while they were conducting hearings to hear about election fraud. That itself is a massive, massive issue. It's like the winner of the Olympics being declared when the judges are still trying to figure out who actually won the match. Now, all the governors that certified the fraud while hearings were taking place violated their oaths of office. This is another key point. Keep this in mind. With the exception of a handful of elected officials, all the evidence was ignored by congressional civil servants. What I mean by that is the people that we actually elect into these positions within the House of Representatives, within the Senate, whether state or local, their duty is to oversee the election process and make sure that when issues and contests of law are brought forward, specifically in this case, that the election results were fraudulent, then they have to hear about what happened. And if they move forward, if they ignore these valid claims, then they're failing to do their duty. Full stop. This is a substance of law issue. As a matter of substance of law, if a referee's job is to make sure that the players in there don't actually violate the rules of the game, but then a referee proceeds, even though there's a clear violation dispute that's happening, then that referee has violated the sacred duty that they have to actually hear out all claims and contested issues. So we're going to discuss this question as to whether or not Trump can be impeached. And in order to do that, let's lay out some facts about how we got to this point of the impeachment trial. So on January 6, 2021, the US Senate gathered to count the Electoral College votes. Weeks before, Trump called on his supporters to gather at the Capitol for the Stop the Steal protest. Hundreds of thousands of Trump supporters arrived. While everyone expected Antifa and Black Lives Matter to show up and cause massive civil unrest and violence, they were mysteriously absent. On the 6th, while Trump spoke at the Stop the Steal event, several agent provocateurs dressed up as Trump supporters incited unwitting real Trump supporters to storm the Capitol building. Leading the charge was Antifa trainer and BLM riot attendee John Sullivan, disguised in pro-Trump MAGA gear. So let me pause here and say, I've heard so many people talk about the event on the 6th, and so many like really rational, logical people, you would think, have just totally accepted the idea that it was the Trump supporters that caused these problems. But in my estimation, in the rallies that I've been to and the Trump supporters I've seen, most of them wouldn't willfully do something like this. In a mob setting, it's only then when people who have good intentions would potentially be led to do something they shouldn't do. And it usually requires an agent provocateur. A lot of these rational people I'm talking about, whether people in the media, even people in the alternative media, seem to fail to recognize is that just because somebody's wearing a MAGA hat doesn't mean they're a Trump supporter. It's entirely possible for somebody who absolutely hates the country, hates the laws of our nation, and hates Trump to put on a MAGA hat and go pretend to be a Trump supporter so they can smear the image of Trump supporters and try to hurt the president. So that should be, in my mind, it's a kind of an obvious thing. But again, there's a lot of not so great critical thinking, we might say, happening right now out there. After the January 6th riot, leaked footage of John Sullivan that he recorded that day proved he willfully intended on misleading the mob of angry Trump supporters along with other agent provocateurs. So he wasn't the only agent provocateur. And this caused a lot of, unfortunately, gullible Trump supporters to just waltz in and just seal the deal when it came to this. Basically, I have to be careful what I say on YouTube. FF operation. In essence, John Sullivan confessed his crimes, and that proved that there was a massive conspiracy at work. Why? Because the media went along with it. If the media was true to their principles and they were just trying to report the facts, then as soon as the video and evidence of John Sullivan being an agent provocateur came out, they would issue corrections and try to clear the record. But they didn't do that. And there's a reason why, because there's an agenda at work, because there's a conspiracy. This isn't an accident. The mainstream media and Congress immediately labeled the riot a domestic terror event incited by Trump, supported by QAnon followers. So the media was trying to blame it on Trump and Q followers. One of the people there, the guy dressed up in the buffalo suit, buffalo hat, he was a QAnon guy. And there was one photo I saw where there's literally I don't know, there must have been 6 reporters around taking photos of him as he's waltzing through the Congress building. Just think about that for a moment. The media and big tech participated in a well-coordinated narrative designed to label Trump the leader of an insurrection against the Capitol. Within hours after the Capitol was breached, Trump posted a video asking those gathered to peacefully go home and disassemble. This in and of itself should prove Trump was not trying to incite an insurrection. Now, as this was happening, as the Capitol building was being stormed, Congress was evacuated. And as we discussed earlier, despite the fact that Trump repeatedly told everyone to remain peaceful beforehand and after the Capitol attack happened, the media and Congress continued to accuse him of inciting an insurrection. Anybody with any sense should know that there's a massive lying cover-up happening. I don't think it's an accident that the Times article was released after the fact. In my estimation, in analyzing these color revolution and manipulation tactics that have happened throughout history, mind you, there's a selling that needs to happen. They're going to do a lot of things. They're going to manipulate the people. They're going to have all sorts of false events. They're going to use agent provocateurs, all sorts of things. And they're going to get the people to get really confused and triggered as to what's happening. And then they're going to have to sell the people on the idea that what happened was the right thing to do and there's nothing that can be changed. And I think we're at that final stage right now. That's why they're kind of playing their hand. There's also a good reason with respect to divine law, which is that free will is the highest law in existence. And at a very, very deep level, the cabal believe that they have to reveal their plans to the people in order for them to assuage the gods, so to speak. There's a specific type of Lord of Darkness that they worship, which if you want to know more about, you can watch my videos on edgeofwonder.tv. And they believe in their religion, despite the fact that you might not believe it, but they believe it. And as a result, this is why they kind of follow the same pattern of constantly revealing their hand. So later that night, this is on the 6th, despite the fact congressmen objected to the certification of electoral college votes, and these congressmen who objected had the required signatures from a representative of the House and the Senate, Joe Biden was officially declared the president-elect. And here, those who participated in the certification of this fraudulent election betrayed the law, the Constitution, and violated their oaths. I'm going to keep repeating that because this is critical to understand for why the sting operation is framed the way it is. Let's get into this whole impeachment of Trump thing. With just days left of Trump's presidency, on January 13th, 2021, Trump was impeached as one of the first decisions of the 117th Congress in House Joint Resolution 24. You got to say, you can't make this stuff up. The fact that it's the 117th Congress when all this is unfolding, and this might be when this Trump card gets played. I mean, wow, hail to Lord kind of thing, because the god of chaos and synchronicity is working overtime right now. But anyway, that's a discussion for another time. Now, 7 days before Trump was set to leave office, Congress attempted to conduct the impeachment trial to remove him. So remember, let me pause here. When we say we impeach a president, what that means is that the House votes to say that a president has committed these high crimes and misdemeanors. That doesn't mean that they've convicted him or that they've proven anything. So this is why presidents can get impeached, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have to leave office or that they get tried or they're put in jail or anything like that. So there has to be a trial to actually prove that some type of wrongdoing took place. That then gives them the power to completely remove the president from office. And then after they're out of office, then they can go through a criminal trial or some type of criminal proceeding to see if there's actually some type of wrongdoing that would have them go into jail or pay damages or things like this. So you would think the deep state would be content with the fact that Trump is out, he has no more power, and we'll just let the 20th come and go, and he'll be, a guy that we don't have to worry about anymore. And they'll just continue to bash him because that's what these guys do. And they have to do that because they have to kill all the ideas that he represents. But you think they'd be done with that. But no, they're continuing to push this impeachment. They're risking a lot by pushing this impeachment. And this could cause the legitimacy of the Biden win to be questioned. And since, as you'll discover, a tyranny maintains its power because people acquiesce to it, it's effectively a confidence game. So it's like ruining or undermining their own confidence game. So they're risking a lot. And you might be wondering, like, why would they do that? So even though Trump was out of office, in an unprecedented move, members of Congress asserted that Trump could still be impeached. They're moving forward with the impeachment. And that's set to happen this week on the 9th. This brings us up to the present. So the question at this point is, can a president be impeached after leaving office, since he's a private citizen at this point? There's never been a situation quite like this before, but there has been a situation where Congress has tried to impeach somebody that was no longer in office. And this happened in 1797. So let me explain the key details of that case. William Blount, a U.S. senator from Tennessee, was accused of high crimes and misdemeanors for sending an incriminating letter that officials at the time believed was proof he had sold out his office to the British. In 1797, the U.S. Senate voted to expel Blount from office under Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution, which is the clause outlining the rules for expulsion. So expulsion is different than impeachment. Expulsion gives Congress the right to kick somebody out of Congress for various reasons. And this did actually happen. Blount was successfully expelled. But before he was expelled, Congress voted to impeach Blount in a successful House vote. Despite the fact that Blount wasn't in office anymore, Congress continued with the impeachment proceeding. What's more, Blount fled the Capitol, having no intention of appearing at the impeachment trial. So this is similar to Trump's impeachment in that, in both instances, the impeachment resolution took place when they were both still in office. But unlike Blount, Trump was never removed. He willingly left the White House in good standing. There was no crimes committed. So it's not like the Senate actually got him removed before he left office. So there's a key difference there. But that difference isn't necessarily important for what I'm about to show you. So let's get to the punchline of why the similarity between Blount's case in 1797 and Trump's case is so similar. As it turns out, Blount's impeachment trial was dismissed. Now, this happened 2 years. The resolution from January 1799 states, and I'm going to quote directly from the resolution, "The court is of the opinion that the matter alleged in the plea of the defendant is sufficient in law to show that this court ought not to hold jurisdiction of the said impeachment, and that the said impeachment is dismissed." So with respect to jurisdiction, they're basically saying that as Congress, we don't have the power to impeach Blount anymore. Now, there's some debate as to why the case was dismissed. Some argue that it was because Blount wasn't physically present to stand trial, as he refused to show up. Others say that Blount was expelled and therefore wasn't a civil officer, disqualifying him from impeachment for the same reason Trump is arguing. As we'll learn, I'm about to read the clause from the Constitution. The impeachment is a provision specifically set up in the Constitution for elected officials. If he's no longer elected official, like what happened with Blount, then there's no jurisdiction. That's what that means as a matter of law. So let's read from this provision in the Constitution. It's Article 2, Section 4, and I quote, "The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors." The key phrase here is shall be removed from office on impeachment for. So why are they removing the people from office? It's for conviction of treason, bribe, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. That's why you can impeach somebody. But all the impeachment is, as a matter of law, is a claim that somebody might have done something wrong. Then you have to take that claim and evaluate it in what's called a hearing to see, well, what's the evidence? Is there really a problem or is there not? If there's no problem, if there's no crime, then the impeachment doesn't go anywhere. That's why a president can be impeached, but they might not be able to be removed from office. And that's what happened in previous times in history. So we need to understand contracts, oath of office, and the different types of statuses of government. Now, let me say here again that it's a question of substance, image versus substance. What do I mean by that? Well, just because I happen to just because I say I want to defend and protect the Constitution, doesn't mean that I actually will. I might be occupying an office that says that leads you to believe I am going to do that. But if I don't actually do it, then there's no substance. It's just the image. So the difference between image and substance is critical, especially when it comes to law. When it comes to law, this is absolutely 100% a massive, massive pillar of the true rule of law. If there's no substance behind a government, then the government isn't really a government. It's just the appearance of a government. The difference between that is a true, honorable, true rule of law republic and a tyranny. So we have to discuss right away that when it comes to questions like this, when we're trying to figure out like what will happen and what's going to go on, there's no way to black and white predict anything. As you may have discovered, there's a lot of predictions flying around, and that can cause a lot of disappointment in people. And it's partially because as people, we've been led to believe that you can just like look into a crystal ball and like absolutely know what the future is going to tell you. But it doesn't really work that way. The military does not operate that way. The military assesses all the different possibilities of what could happen, and then they account for each one. And that's what we need to do. And that's why I'm trying to be very thorough when I explain all this. So this means, like a game of chess, we need to consider multiple possible moves and understand how each might be at play. In this sense, we're going to talk about the principles of law, and I'm going to show you some things that are really going to help with your understanding, hopefully. So I need to tell you one of the biggest secrets of the way the law works. It's what you might call the absolute foundation of all law. No law on the books, legal code, statute, or precedent can escape this principle that we're about to discuss. And yet, in all my years of studying law, I've rarely heard anyone explain it simply. Now, with this understanding, all other aspects of the law will make sense to you. To be sure, it's going to take some time to unpack, so it's not like you're just going to have this like switch flipped and all of a sudden you're just going to be able to understand the law perfectly. But with this core, it's kind of like a cipher. You know, if you understand what a cipher is, then you can decode things. I'm going to give you one of the best ciphers to understand the law, how a nation works, and what our duty to the nation and what officials' duty to the people are with this concept we're about to discuss. So the big secret is, it's that all law is contractual. It's based on agreements. All laws from low to high, corporate or constitutional, are different types of agreements and contracts. The reason why is fairly simple, but we could be talking about the foundations of the law for hours. So I'm going to give you 3 key reasons. Let me say this to start, because I know there's different types of laws. There's divine law, which is the laws of God. There's natural law, which comes from the divine law. So that's like the law of gravity, the law of electricity, the laws of the way time works, these kind of things. And then there's what's called positive law, which is when human beings create rules for how they're going to govern their behavior. And that's what's called positive law. So that's literally founded on us. And that is because every human being has a human mind. We have rights and we have free will. So first, your human mind gives you the power to see the invisible world of laws, the rules that say you can or cannot do something. This is where agreements are formulated. It's in the mind where people gather together and decide what rules they should abide by. A meeting of the minds is one of the core pillars of a valid and honorable contract. If there is no meeting of the minds, there is deception. If there is deception or bad faith, then the contract is corrupt, to put it simply. Now, 2, this is the second one. Your rights come from the Creator, God. Now, you might not believe in God, but the fact of the matter is no one in all the long years of human history has ever figured out a way to create a lawful system without acknowledging God. The only explanation that makes sense when coming up with where rights come from is that God gave us rights. Hence, you have the right to agree to disagree to a proposed contract. So even these so-called atheistic communist governments use this system and secretly acknowledge that rights come from a creator being. And you might be saying, what are you talking about, Justin? You know, it's not like in the founding documents of communist nations, they acknowledge a creator. No, but in substance, they do, because the only logical explanation for where rights come from and how a government should work is the explanation of God, basically. And all of these legal codes all pull from the source code of the Roman Curia. So the Romans figured this out a long time ago. The Celts figured this out a long time ago. Every society on earth in some form or substance has figured this out, reaching all the way back to Sumerian times and likely well before that. So 3, your free will gives you the power to choose. The same God that gave you rights and gave you a mind, gave you a piece of himself, his absolute and infinitely powerful will. And in every system of law on earth, free will is sacred. It's actually the cornerstone of the 3 keys of law and the foundation of all governments. You might say that your free will is what makes you sovereign like a king, and that is basically true. Now, there's more to the difference between kings and, citizens and whatnot, but at the core, all of us have the right to choose. And there's a whole lot we could get into there. But even when it comes to slavery, let me just take a moment to show you how powerful this actually is. A slave has to acquiesce to being a slave. Now you might say, Justin, they have no choice. They're going to get killed. They're going to get beaten. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You're right. If a slave tries to run off the plantation, they're probably going to get killed. They're going to get flogged. They're going to get maimed. It's going to be horrible, but they still have the right to choose. At the end of the day, all that can really happen is through intimidation and coercion and manipulation. Somebody can be forced to do something, and that at the core of essence of choice, the kind of like foundation of our reality, a person still has to choose. And there have been slaves and people who said, you know what? F you, I'm not going to be a slave. You better damn kill me instead. So this idea that, something happens totally and completely out of your free will is actually an illusion. It's a part of this victim script that the people in power want you to believe so that you acquiesce to their power. So what does all this have to do with impeachment? Well, it's because impeachment is a process defined by the Constitution, and the Constitution, you guessed it, is a contract. The Founding Fathers used their minds, inalienable rights, and free will to form what's called a body politic, where free will beings that are inherently sovereign form a government via the consent of the people or the governed. You might have heard that phrase before or something like it. We're going to read it right now. Now, the word consent proves the fact that the Constitution is a type of contract. All governments across the world are types of contracts. And specifically, governments are actually corporations. And there's a whole lot to that, but we'll have to save that for another time. Now, let's read this phrase from the Declaration of Independence because it addresses this issue right here. What the Declaration of Independence is, it's a declaration of facts. The way contracts work is that there has to be mutually agreed upon facts. We have to at least agree on some basic things so that we can start to work together on something. So the Declaration of Independence is one of the supporting documents for the Constitution. It says, and I quote, "Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." Just powers from the consent of the governed. There's 2 types of consent. There's implied consent and explicit consent. Explicit consent is when you say, hey, Justin, can I do this? And I say, yes, you can. And there's a meeting of the minds. You know what you're agreeing to. I know what I'm agreeing to. And we create a beautiful, honorable contract. Implied consent is when you take something and because I don't stop you, now we've created an implied contract that says I've given you permission. That's also called acquiescence. Keep that idea in mind because this is something the cabal use all the time. Acquiescence is a huge pillar. And this is, again, why the very fact that the cabal rules by acquiescence proves the fact that free will is at the core of our reality when it comes to the way civilizations work. The Constitution, like all other contracts, has terms and conditions, the specific rules of operation. These are outlined as articles and amendments. A contract and the documents that support it have to define A, what things are. So what are the things that are actually at work in the agreement or the Constitution? B, what those things do. And C, how to handle certain situations that would apply to the things defined. So that's why they define what an office of the president is. They define what a legislature is. They define what the Supreme Court is. They define what the states are. So every word, when you're trying to figure out how law works, you got to realize that there's a reason why everything is precisely stated. It's because literally the use of these words defines or carves out an outline of an idea that then creates a definition. So literally by me saying that in my country, we have a president and that president is elected by the people, that statement in and of itself creates a term and condition that defines a term. The term is a president, a people, and what they do to bring that person or that citizen into power, which is an election. So when a contract, or the Constitution in this case, our Constitution, doesn't specifically outline how a situation is to be handled, then this creates an ambiguity that produces what's called a controversy in law. This is huge. A controversy is when there's a disagreement about how to proceed. In this case, should Trump be impeached even though he's not in office? Now, the other thing that happens when there's a controversy in law is when there's a vacancy created. What happens when an official violates their oath, and therefore they, in that moment they violate their oath, they cease to be an actually elected official, but they're still acting as if they're an elected official? Well, it creates a controversy, right? Rights are being violated. The people didn't actually elect an official to violate their oath. The people elected official to honor their oath, which means there's a breach of contract. There's a controversy. And so if we continue to act as if these people have power and we don't stop them in some lawful way, then we legitimize the government by our acquiescence. So controversies in law and all that is very important. Specifically, what I'm talking about here is what happens in the situation where Trump is supposedly impeached, but he's a private citizen. Like, what's going on there? The situation with Trump impeachment is even more unprecedented because of the fact Biden cheated to get in office. So it's not just that President Trump lost and it's like, oh, well, better luck next time. No, he lost only because Biden cheated, which means Biden didn't actually win. Trump won by default. So massive issues here. And this is also more complicated, and more controversy takes place because oaths of office were violated by the people in government that were supposed to do their job to defend and protect the Constitution, to make sure that our elections were free and fair. So we've got controversies all over the place. Effectively, when you hear controversy, when people in a government are supposed to do their duty and they don't, it's chaos. And what happens when there's chaos? Well, the guy with the biggest stick, the biggest gun, the loudest voice, the power to manipulate the mob the most, whoever can create that order for the people, because they're all confused and they don't know what to do, is the one who's going to have the power. And this is the way at a really deep level, these chaos sorcerers, as it's been called, work. The cabal are chaos sorcerers. They destroy order so they can create their own in its place. So if Biden is really the president, despite the fraud, how can Trump be impeached? I mean, think about that. Let's just think about this question. It's a contradiction. Like, if Biden is truly the president, then Trump can't be impeached because that only applies to elected officials, which means the very fact that they're trying to impeach him must itself be an admission that Biden isn't the president and Trump still is the president. And you're like, well, wait a minute, Justin, how do you know that? Well, I don't have to explain that to you guys. I'm sure you get it. But the point is that because there's election fraud, this whole idea that Biden isn't really the president is not just some conspiracy theory. As a matter of law, it's literally true. When the rules break down, which is what we have in this situation, then whatever rules are still in place, as broken as they are the ones that we should try to work on. Provision in contracts, which states often that if one provision ceases to be enforced, then the rest of the provisions will remain in place. And that is a foundational concept of an agreement in law. So we need to understand something else about contracts. And that's when a contract is formed, all parties have to act in good faith, pledge to be honest, and do their duty. They have to honor the terms and conditions in the agreements to maintain their honor and status as trustworthy parties to the contract. This means they have to do what they agreed to do in the contract. If they violate the terms and conditions of the contract by failing to do their duty, then they are in dishonor. If they fail to address their violation and try to cover it up, which is exactly what happened to most of the officials in governments during the 2020 election, they are acting in bad faith, along with being in breach of trust and contract. If we agree to have a contract, if we agree to do something together and you have a duty to do something and you don't do your duty, it's called being in dishonor. So that's dishonor, right? Then if I come to you and I'm like, hey man, you said you were going to do this and you didn't do it. Now we're trying to have a hearing, right? We're talking to figure out what happened. If you're like, no, dude, I didn't dishonor the contract. You're crazy. You're lying. No, there was no dishonor in place. I did return you the car, even though there's no car in my driveway, and I agreed to lend you my car as long as you bring it back. Then now you're not only in dishonor, you're also in breach of trust. You're in bad faith. The reason why this happens is, hey, people, they make mistakes sometimes. They're negligent. They're stupid. They make bad mistakes. They wake up late. They, do all sorts of things. So you go to them and you're like, get your act together. Let's figure out a way to solve this problem, and you'll be in good faith again and you'll restore your honor. If you deny the fact that you did something wrong, then not only are you in dishonor, now you're in breach of contract and breach of trust. And breach of trust is a high crime. It literally prevents us from working together again. It's a doubling down. That's what I said earlier. It's like the fact that the cabal doubled down, the fact that they continue to assert that there was no election fraud and that these actors in government, did nothing wrong, and then there's no problem, and that if you question the election results, then you're some kind of traitor and you're violating the democracy. This is like, when it comes to a matter of law, when it comes to their ability to rule justly, I mean, it's like you burned the whole thing down. It's that intense. Every elected official, including judges, take an oath of office. As a matter of fact, the oath is one of the most important parts of sitting in an official position of government. This is especially true in the United States because every government office created by the Constitution of laws derived from it take an oath to defend and protect the Constitution. So it's really important. To know this is hugely important. I did a video last year about all this. Unfortunately, it got taken down by YouTube. I wonder why. But maybe in the future, I'll record another one. It was like, I broke all the reasons why an oath is really important. But basically, to give you an idea, why is an oath important? An oath is the elected officials' promise that they're actually going to take the consent that we give them, because we're giving them our rights to defend and protect something. And if they don't honor it, then now that's their word that's been broken. And now this itself gives us a power to get them the hell out of office. If they're in office and they're not honoring their oaths, then they're effectively a tyrant. And that's when we, the people, have to kind of take steps. And there's a lot of people that are doing that right now in a lot of different ways. So let's talk about precedent for a moment. Precedent is when a new decision is made to fix an ambiguity in a contract. This new decision becomes a new term and condition, having the same force in law as an amendment. If, for instance, Trump's impeachment trial finds him guilty of the charges, then this would create a precedent that in future situations like this, presidents could be impeached even if they are out of office. Wow, that'd be huge. So it'd literally be like changing the Constitution by making this decision go forward. New decisions that create precedent is like adding a new term and condition to a contract after the fact, because the precedent has the same effect as a term and condition. Have you ever heard of legislating from the bench? That's what this means. When judges make new decisions, they create precedent, and that changes the law. That's why decisions like Roe v. Wade have so much power. The last aspect we need to cover is enforcement. The maxim of law for enforcement is that laws are only as good as what is enforced. If an official in an office discovers a crime and their office is specifically given the powers to act and they don't, they are negligent and they have dishonored the office. Office holders literally have to enforce the laws they are entrusted to oversee. If they fail, it's a massive issue, a dereliction of duty, and a serious violation of the core tenets of law. So it's another reason, to know that an office holder isn't doing their duty. So if they make an oath and they breach their oath, they're in dishonor at that point. If they refuse to acknowledge the breach of oath, then they are breach of contract and they're effectively a tyrant. They're like a guy with a gun who refuses to give the gun up, and you gave it to him to protect you. A government enforces its laws via the people in it, the office holders within the government. The rule of law in this sense means that when an office holder enforces the law fairly and in harmony with the principles of law and true justice, then the government is true and just. So what makes a government true and just is that the people in it honor their word and honor their duty. And this is effectively what makes a government work properly as a matter of law. When an officer fails to do their duty, this means the government itself is what's called defunct. It means there is no just government anymore. There is only corruption and tyranny. So this, my friends, is the cornerstone of what I discovered. So let's understand what defunct means, because this is the big portion of why I think a massive trump card is being played right now. In simple terms, defunct means broken. It doesn't work anymore. Remember that a party to a contract has to honor their duty. If an official fails to do their duty, then the office is in effect vacant. It's empty. I know this can be a bit confusing, so let me put this in plain English. Let's say, for instance, to put this in an example, you were a police officer on duty in a bank. Let's say a bunch of bank robbers came in and tried to rob the bank. If you just sat there and did nothing, then it's literally like you weren't there at all, because the robbers just walked in and robbed the bank. So think about it. You're there to defend the bank from robbers. If you just sit there and you're like flipping on your phone, then it's equivalent to, it's equal to you literally not being present at all. And therefore, the law, the rule that prevents the robbers from robbing the bank, is not present. It's not being enforced. And therefore, there's no rule of law. Now, let's use the same logic when thinking about the officials in government during the 2020 election. The officials knew about the fraud. They ignored it, and therefore they violated their oaths. The substance of what a government is, okay, so like what is the actual thing that makes a government what it is? What's like the core, right? Not just the appearance of a government, but the meat is duty and the rule of law. Therefore, when an office holder violates their oath, in that moment, there is no rule of law anymore. Only those office holders who honored the law remain in government. Think about that. Again, I'm going to use the bank robber example. You've got 3 officers in the bank, right? They're all supposed to defend the bank from robbers. Well, if 2 of them don't do their duty and 1 of them does, then what does that mean? It means that the one who does is the only one who's actually putting forth their duty, and the rule of law is maintained through them. And you do have the rule of law. So it's same concept with respect to a big government. If only some portions of the government actually honor their oath, then that means that's the thing that's kind of holding it all together, as broken as it is. And we got to fix it. We got to heal it. But, at least there's that. There might be a broken leg, but at least there's not 2 broken legs, So using that logic, out of all the 3 branches of the federal government, only 1 actually honored their oath and did their duty with respect to the election fraud. It's the executive branch. It's Donald J. Trump. Now, some congressmen and women did investigate the election fraud, but most didn't. So this is my theory. So this is where we're getting into theory territory. And remember, the theory doesn't mean this is like my unshakable opinion and I'm putting all my money on this. I'm just saying, after analyzing all the data I just put forth, let's sit back and be like, well, given what we got on paper here, let's see what happens. If new data prevents itself, if somebody who has a better argument or has a fact that I didn't consider comes onto the table and says, hey, Justin, have you heard about this? Let's think about that. Then guess what? The theory can be improved. That's the way it works. And instead of us trying to fight each other about who's got the best theory, let's all work together and pool our resources together. Isn't that what standing united is all about? So I'm going to give you my theory about what I think this means and why this is a trump card. So my theory is that Biden, the deep state actors in government, and the media know about all of this. They know about this whole rule of law thing. They know that they have doubled down. They know that they're in breach of oath. They know that they're in dishonor. They know that they know that they're in breach of trust. They know that when the rule of law is no longer in operation, they can still rule via tyranny, via acquiescence of the people. So now it's a confidence game. How are you going to get the mob to go along with the guy that wants to rule the mob? You got to convince the people through other means, through manipulation, through coercion, through tyranny. When we, the people, allow the now defunct government to act as if it is valid, then we legitimize tyranny. This is why the media, via the Times article, needs to sell us on the idea that they had to steal the election to save democracy. At present, like in the past, we have no true constitutional republic. Now, technically, we haven't had one for a while because this isn't the first time these kind of situations have happened, Civil War. But we'll cover that in another video. What we have now is tyranny that appears to be real government. So again, the substance of law. Think about this in terms of a relationship. If you're dating a guy, if you're a girl and you're dating a guy and everything seems lovey-dovey, and all of a sudden you discover that he cheated on you with your friend, well, as soon as that act happens, you're no longer in a really awesome relationship. You're in something completely different. So it's that quick at a substance level, at a spiritual level, the level of mind and spirit. As soon as a bad act happens, the whole game's changed. That's what we're dealing with right now. But that also means we can do something about it. And other actors who still have their oath of office intact, like the military and like Trump, can do something. So how is the deep state going to maintain their power? How are they going to legitimize their tyranny? Well, they have to sell the people on it. This is what, earlier I said color of law. Ask yourself, why is the term color revolution used? Well, I don't know exactly where they came the term up, but what the correspondence definitely is that what happens in a color revolution is that the legitimate government is destabilized, the people destroy the government, and a false government is put in its place, often with election fraud. And so it's a color revolution that has a color of law society put in its place, a tyranny under the guise of a true democracy. Again, the substance of law is very clear. If the election was bogus, then Biden cheated, then the only person who got legitimate votes, the legal votes count. This is why Trump kept saying this. That means only Trump is technically the leader because there's nobody else in office. Only Trump is technically the president. I think part of the reason that they want to impeach the president is to sell us on the idea that Trump has been dethroned from power. Not because they know that we know that Trump's still the president. It's because within their own defunct system, they believe, and this harkens back to the religion of the deep state, so to speak, which I've written about before, that they have to honor the rules of creation as much as possible, because if they don't, they invent divine intervention. But it's also just part of the confidence game. They need to devalue the idea of Trump being a legitimate leader in our minds, so most people go along with it. So that way, if Trump does try to assert himself in some type of military coup, then they can be like, oh, no, technically, even though we're going to admit now that we cheated, we impeached you, so Biden still got to be president? But that's like a massive gaslighting. But, again, we're dealing with mind manipulators. We're dealing with people who are con artists. A con artist doesn't just have one lie in their pocket. They've got 20 lies. So if you find out that one, don't worry. We've got another one to sell you on. So I think that's part of why the impeachment is moving forward. It's part of a confidence game. And it's part of a way to legally dethrone Trump so they can have Biden be legitimized. They need to substantiate their tyranny by us acquiescing. Remember, a contract, how does a contract work? Well, you got explicit consent and you got implied consent. If the people go along with the show, if they go along with the confidence game, then what happens? The con man gets what they want, right? Well, same thing here. What is the thing that the cabal wants? They want to maintain their power so they can push their agenda. So if we go along with it, if we buy into the idea that Trump is an evil dictator and he needs to be impeached, then and that the ends justify the means, then we've substantiated their illegitimate government and their tyranny by acquiescing. And that creates a different type of contract, but it's still enforceable, it's still real. And that's the implied contract. Now you might be saying like, well, Justin, if you're saying contracts are the fundamental basis of reality, then there's no contract that says the slave is willing to accept his slavery. He doesn't sign away his life on the dotted line. Well, no, but he does through action imply his consent. It's acquiescence. And that is a contract. So again, at every level, we have agreements. The fact that you don't stop him, the fact that you don't stop the slave master and you do what they say implies that you do agree. You're acting as if you did give up your rights and you willingly participated in slavery by actually telling them, I would like to be a slave. What is the effect? At the end of the day, the effect is the same, whether it's through acquiescence or through you willingly giving up your rights to become a slave. It's the same effect. So that's why it has to be legitimized under this contractual lawful reality type of a situation. Now, in closing, I think the Patriots knew about all of this. I think they wanted to back the cabal into a corner. They wanted to put the cabal in a situation where they had to double down, that they were going to commit dishonor, they were going to violate their oaths, and instead of acknowledging that so they could restore their honor, which they were never going to do, and the Patriots knew it, then they put them in a situation where they had to basically lie to the people. They had to play their hand as cabal actors. And they've literally done that through the Times article. I mean, really think about how all these pieces work. So what that means is that the only people left in government that are still there, that are honoring their oaths, are the people in government, in the courts, in the legislatures, in the state legislatures, and anywhere else who are still honoring their oaths. Those are the people who are still the legitimate government. If they, along with Trump, who also honored his oath, and the military, who are by definition people who are there to defend and protect the Constitution, if they act to arrest the bad guys, if they act to arrest the government from these bad actors, then a true rule of law government can be restored. This is why I think our famous military insiders kept saying it has to be done legally, it has to be shown to the people, and we could potentially see one of the biggest booms in history unfold. Now, I don't know when any of this is going to happen. It might happen this week. It might happen in 3 months. I mean, this is the thing, is like, until it happens, we're living under tyranny. But the moment people find the courage to do the right thing, the whole game changes and we can restore our government very, very quickly. So in history, there's always been this ebb and flow. Just governments get created, tyrants slowly work their way in to corrupt them. The people don't know what it takes to run a just government, and then the whole system collapses, and then the whole cycle repeats itself. This has been happening all throughout history. Thank you so much for listening and considering all this. I'm really curious what your thoughts are. It occurred to me, given all this situation, that I think there might be a lot happening that you'd all really want to know about. And it would be a good educational opportunity because, frankly, the only way we're going to keep our freedom is through eternal vigilance. This idea that we can just blindly give our power away to elected officials and just hope that they're going to do the right thing has got to end. We have to be our brother's keeper. We have to know the law, and the law ultimately comes from one place, the divine. When we follow the law, when we honor each other's rights, we're literally doing God's will.